So we will hear from the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation.
Honourable members of the committee, my name is Karen Littlewood. I want to thank you for granting me the opportunity to present to you today. I am proud to be here as the President of the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation, representing more than 60,000 frontline education workers, including educational assistants, psychologists, office staff, custodians, university support staff, public high school teachers, and occasional teachers. They support Ontario students in classrooms every day and on post-secondary campuses across the province. I myself am a teacher. I started my career in 1991, so not my anniversary, but it's been a while. And unfortunately, Ontario's public education system is not what it used to be. Our province has been world-renowned for decades as having one of the best public education systems in the world. But instead of prioritizing investments in public education, this government has doubled down on underfunding schools and campuses, especially since taking office in 2018. Governing is about making tough decisions. What's best for some might not be best for others. And the thing is, public education benefits everyone, every single person in Ontario, their families and their communities. Public education is supposed to be the great equalizer, which is why I continue to be baffled by the Ford government's choice to shortchange the public education system. Ontario is in the midst of the most severe staffing crisis in public education, an historic shortchanging, a crisis largely fueled by the province's deliberate and continued underfunding. And before you say this is the highest funding ever, I want to dispel any myths about education funding. Any increase that does not keep up with inflation is, in fact, a cut. We know that from 2018 until last year's budget, the Ford government has cut $1,200 in funding per pupil. I don't even want to think how high that number will be when we have the final calculations as we head into the 2024-2025 school year. The thing is, we know these cuts are intensifying the staffing crisis, as is the Ford government's refusal to invest in fair wages for teachers and especially education workers. Just this year, principals across Ontario were surveyed for the not-for-profit People for Education, and they identified staffing as their number one concern. A majority also said that relatively low wages are the main driver of this crisis, because in fact, the staffing crisis is not due to shortages. We have more than enough people in this vast province of ours to fill the positions. There are more than 46,000 qualified individuals with teaching certificates that have chosen to leave the profession or to teach outside of Ontario. And sadly, some graduates from the faculties of education never even go into teaching, having personally seen the effects of the government's underfunding and shortchanging in their practice teaching placements. It's such a loss. This departure is true for education workers as well. They can find far better pay and working conditions with a far less chance of violence in the private sector. I want to give you some concrete examples. The York Region District School Board routinely finds itself short-staffed with regards to psychologists, social workers, and speech and language pathologists, the very people who help our most vulnerable students, leading to longer wait times or in many cases no service at all. Parents who can pay out of pocket for services that should be offered in schools, and parents who can't pay, their kids go without. It sounds like another form of privatization to me, haves and have-nots, and a further example of students being left behind. The Blue Water Board in the Owen Sound area had an IT or an information technology position that had been vacant for 3 years and was only just filled last month. And one of the main reasons that they gave for that is that the pay in the school board is significantly less than similar positions in the private sector. There are significant funding issues at the post-secondary level as well. Ontario ranks last among Canadian provinces in terms of public funding per university student. Dead last. It's nothing to be proud of. Despite the Minister of Colleges, Training and Universities bragging about a $1 billion investment, that money is far below what is needed, and the government has totally ignored the recommendations of its own blue ribbon panel. The government is always saying they want to invest in good, high-paying jobs for the future. I want that too. But you can't simply press a button and have an excess of talented professionals waiting to fill those high-paying jobs. You need to invest in today's students so they're ready for tomorrow. I happen to believe that Ontario students deserve the best, which means we need to recruit and retain the best. So again, it brings me back to choices. The government chooses to shortchange public education, chooses to ignore the staffing crisis, and chooses to abandon the students of Ontario. Qualified professionals leave public education, causing staffing issues, reduced supports for students, and increased demands on education workers and teachers. Learning conditions worsen, and unfortunately, violence is all the more likely to occur. What was once an issue turns into a full-blown province-wide crisis. That's where we are right now. This was all entirely preventable. We know what the solutions are for this crisis. I have presented to this committee numerous times, as have my colleagues, and just this winter, OSSTF FEESO presented 38 always make me jump when you do that. 38 recommendations to this committee that would address the staffing crisis and improve public education for all students in Ontario. But I don't see a single one of the recommendations addressed in the budget. Every one of our recommendations was affordable and doable with Ontario's current resources, and the crisis has actually intensified since we made that submission. So I'm here today to say it doesn't need to be this way. We can work together to not only overcome the crisis, but regain the world-renowned standing of Ontario's public education system. Our students deserve better. Ontario deserves better. So thank you for listening and providing me with the opportunity to speak to you. I look forward to your comments and questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. We now will hear from we now go start the first round of questioning with the official opposition. MPP 5.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to all presenters. It feels a little like deja vu, I just want to say a little bit, and I'm sorry about that. This morning I asked the Finance Minister direct questions about the impact of Bill 124. And I feel like your presentations are very much connected to that piece of legislation. On February 23rd, the government had to repeal the legislation through an order in council because, as you know, it was deemed unconstitutional. And ironically, the government at that time said that repealing it would, and I quote, solve the inequality of workers created by the recent court decision, a court decision upholding collective bargaining rights. I wanted to give both Catholic teachers and OSSTF an opportunity to talk about the lasting impact of Bill 124 because there are some lessons to be learned when a government imposes unconstitutional legislation on the very people that are building the province. Karen, you can go first, please.
Thank you for the question. It's been a very challenging time period. Through our collective agreement that was from 2019 until 2022 with Bill 124 and a 1% increase, it over time became increasingly hard to staff the schools. Teachers have one salary, but we represent education workers, some people working in childcare, barely making minimum wage. We have others who are in the university sector. We do have psychologists who earn more, but what we're finding is that people are leaving education, and it has a lot to do with the fact that they can't keep up with inflation, that they were absolutely restricted. We knew from the start that the law was unconstitutional, yet how many dollars were spent trying to say, no, this is okay, and we can impose this kind of restraint. And as I pointed out, it is deja vu all over again. This is a women-dominated field, and those types of restrictions were not placed on male-dominated sectors, but they were on women-dominated sectors. So we look at people, many of our education workers are single parents, trying to make sure that their kids have what they need, working 2, 3, 4 jobs. And what we're asking them to do is just too much. And when you put it together with fewer and fewer supports in the schools and increasing violence, people are leaving education. And I think that is such a disservice to the students of the province. I think our students deserve the very best, and I think that means having a fully funded education model where we have trained individuals, not unqualifieds filling in.
Thank you very much for that. Renee, do you want to go as well?
I think Karen has hit on a really critical part, the funding and the financial impact that has. But it also severs the relationship. The notwithstanding clause use, the use of legislation, severs a relationship that you have to have between workers and management. And that, to me, is a really critical indicator. It led to 2 years of instability from I don't think anybody wants instability, but that's a natural consequence in 2 years of bargaining because the relationship is so strained is part of the challenge that we face. So it's not only the financial impact that Karen pointed out, but it's just not really a good way to effectively implement or manage the system.
I mean, and the research and evidence is really clear about what's happening in our schools. So in order for the government to ignore it, especially with Bill 180, I feel like we're at a tipping point. I mean, my husband's a OSSTF, as my sister, my dad was as well, and new teachers are leaving the profession because it is such it's so stressful, and the tension is very real. The other issue is that they feel helpless because the mental health supports are not there. The kids are not okay. We've been saying this to the Minister of Education now for some time. Cameras in schools are not a solution to the toxic social media world that our children are experiencing. This was a missed opportunity. I mean, it missed the moment of addressing this crisis. Can you both sort of touch on the mental health piece that's impacting both the working environment and the learning environment and staff as well as students? Sure, yeah, go first, Karen.
Absolutely, and there's a third aspect to that for us in OSSTF where we have people who are child and youth workers who are mental health supports as well. I spoke with someone who's a child and youth worker in a GTA board, I won't identify, who was assigned to one high school last year. This year, he's assigned to 2. And he said to me, I feel such guilt when I am at high school A and something happens at high school B and I can't be there to support the students. The education workers have a real connection to the students and they want to deliver for them. But when somebody tells you that story, it's not just that worker, it's that student. Do they have the supports that they need? Because they don't. And it's really, to see that kind of change and erosion over time. I'm not a trained mental health worker. If I was in the classroom right now, I'd be doing my best for the students, but I need a professional to do that job.
Okay. Thank you. Renee, do you want to talk about mental health?
Yeah. One of the challenges coming out of COVID is that even average students have a problem. They go to school and they recognize they have a learning difficulty, or not a learning difficulty, a gap in their learning, and they're not used to that feeling it, so it undermines their confidence. So we have more and more kids who are acting up. And acting up and violence are a form of communication, and it comes out of frustration, it comes out of not reaching their needs. And so we have a heightened time where we need investments, and we're actually cutting all of the things that they need. What I want to say, though, is I want to maybe talk just like as a teacher, because I've been there, and I remember a period of my career, I've been teaching since 1986, where we had something similar. And it's something to be in a classroom and look in the eyes of a student and look at them and think, you're not going to get this credit. Not because you can't learn and not because I can't teach you, but because I don't have the time and resources to give you the credit. And that breaks teachers' hearts. And that's why they're leaving the classroom. It's that simple.
Yeah, and the facts of the money don't lie. I mean, we have had independent analysis from the Financial Accountability Officer. Also, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives has determined that when you take inflation into account, school boards received an average of $1,200 less per student in 2023-2024 and than they received in 2018. So that's just since this government was elected. This year alone, funding was on average $600 lower per student than the year before. Now, the government doesn't like us to talk about this because this is the true accountability, and it's past the press releases and the commercials that you're paying for that says everything's great. That's $600 less per student. Give us quickly 2 quick examples. What does that mean on the ground?
It means you don't have the staff that you need. It means that you don't have the supports that you need. It means that the students really are not able to be as successful as we would hope that they would be.
Sure. Right.
And you don't have the time to prepare the curriculum or the resources. You don't have the time to in-service the teachers, so you're bringing in changes that we can't even bring to the kids when they need it most.
Thank you. And what I'm hearing is that the culture of education right now is quite toxic. And we have to turn this around. I've never seen it this bad, and I thought it couldn't get any worse than last year. So thank you both for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to MPP Hazel.
So thank you to the panel for coming in and making your presentation. And I feel you, both Secondary School Teachers Federation and the English Catholic Teachers Association. Traveled with this committee, and we've heard from many organizations about the budget pressures, about Bill 124, about the mental crisis to the teachers, to the students, and as you just said, teachers are leaving in drones. I've got children in the education system. Children are being failed in the education system. This morning, I've asked questions directly to the funding for schools, and I got that it's being funded. So I want to talk to you about what that funding means to both of you. And if you don't get that extra funding, because we know it's a shortfall, it's a horrible shortfall right now for you, what does your 24-25 school year will look like? Because we know it's grim, but just put it on the record.
It's not really a correction, but it's not extra funding. Extra funding would be great. It's the funding that we need to do the work that has been done over years. We're not keeping up. And when you talk to school boards and trustees speak out, and some of them are speaking out now, they're saying we can't balance the budget. It was a big news story, I think, last week in Toronto. What are they going to do to balance their budget? When you talk about Peel, in the Peel board, they were going to not have the supports for deaf-blind and deaf-blind students. How are those students supposed to be successful in the schools? Parents spoke up, and the board said, okay, well, we'll fund it for another year, but they don't know where the money's coming from. And so it has these long-term impacts on the most vulnerable students, but on the whole system, and people are leaving the profession. And we don't need to have retirees coming back in to fill the gaps. We need to have teachers for tomorrow. We need principals for tomorrow.
Thank you. And I will ask you the same
question. I think maybe one of the ways, it's so hard to put it in terms. So if you have a $17 billion backlog on buildings and you invest $1 billion, that sounds like a lot. But let me make it as if it was in a classroom. If I'm in my classroom and 17 desks are broken and you repair one of them, how am I going to do my class? Because that's on a micro scale what's going on, right? So I also want to say that I think we need to think about what models we might be copying. Because let's be clear, we're moving to an American model, but we haven't ever had the conversation, what are the best, are we actually want the best for kids, then we should be looking at the best examples in the world and talk about how they fund the success and how they plan it and stuff. And our funding is headed in the opposite direction. Ontario, at a time we have more wealth than ever, is dead last in spending on healthcare and education. How do we explain that to ourselves and not see that as a problem? Teachers believe there's a better future. We build a future every day. One student, one classroom, one day at a time. It's an act of hope, and we need help to do that.
Well, thank you for breaking that down for me. What I'm really worried about, because I see it a lot, I hear a lot about with my constituency, is the mental capacity of the students in those classrooms. And it's really getting to the parents. It's already on the students. And now parents has to step in. They don't know how to help their children to cope. And I hear it. So I know you're seeing that a lot in your classrooms, but how are you dealing with it? Because at some point in time, you have to deal with it.
There are people who are going off on leaves because it's far too challenging. It is when I'm expected to be a psychologist, a mental health worker, an attendance counselor, a teacher in a D-stream classroom, multi-level curriculum. I think I heard last week there were in Toronto some grade 4, 5, 6 classes being combined together because of staffing needs. That's not acceptable. Principals are covering classes. Well, that's fine, except that's a Band-Aid. We don't need Band-Aids on the system. We need a plan going forward that's going to address the needs of students and make sure that we have the staff to deliver for the future of the province.
Thank you. Did you want to add to that?
One of the challenges, we're turning education into a failure experience for more and more students when they don't have the support they need.
That concludes the time. MPP Harris. It'll come on by itself.
There we go. Amazing. Thank you, presenters, for being here today. And listen, I think we're going to beg to differ on a lot of the points, and there's certainly, I think, a lot of rhetoric that has been kind of thrown around here so far today. And when you talk about saying that we are the lowest funded per capita, or whatever the term was, with health and education, I think you got to remember, we're a sub-sovereign nation, and the other people the other jurisdictions that you're comparing to, these are funded by countries. We get very little help when it comes to the federal government to actually deal with these types of issues. And I would say that if you're having these types of conversations here, I think it would be incumbent upon you to make sure that you're having them at the federal level as well, to say, hey, federal government, you need to give the provinces more money to help deal with these problems. Because all the issues you've talked about, when you're talking about inflation and you're talking about all the other issues that come in with, just higher pricing for everything and supply chain issues and looking at interest rates and all of these things, they all contribute to that factor, right? So if you're looking at, say, Denmark or Scandinavia, which is usually always kind of a benchmark, you're talking about populations of only a couple of million people, which is sometimes, in some cases, smaller than the city of Toronto. And you're also talking about sovereign nations where they're able to deal with their problems as a whole, right? So I don't think it's a fair comparison, and I'm not saying that we're right or wrong here, because I want to have a legitimate discussion today, and that's kind of the point. But when we throw these terms out, I think it often kind of starts to conflate issues. So I just wanted to kind of sort of set the table with that as we sort of look forward into kind of the questions that I'm going to ask. So school safety. I have 5 kids in the public school system with Waterloo Region District School Board. And we hear stories from teachers, we hear stories from parents, we hear stories from students. And use the term Band-Aid, I believe it was. And throwing more money at a problem is often a Band-Aid. What I'd really like to hear from both of you, and certainly give you an opportunity both to respond, is what can we do from a policy standpoint? What can we do from a real, in reality, pragmatic standpoint to start changing the channel on some of this? Not just about money, but what can we actually do to make a tangible difference? And if you wouldn't mind, Karen, if you'd like to start.
Absolutely. I also sit as a vice president with the Canadian Teachers Federation. So just to your first comment, I have been lobbying that we would have a federal minister of education. We are, I think, the only country in the world that doesn't have that. And if we had someone in that type of position, they would be able to set those standards so provinces and territories could follow. So, for example, when $2 billion from the federal government came in for COVID funding, we'd know where it went, because we don't know where it went in Ontario. A nutrition program was just announced, $1 billion. I'm really hoping the government is going to stand up and do their part, because other provinces and territories have already committed to that. So, yes, let's work together on that. Let's continue to push for those federal investments, and let's make sure they actually happen in Ontario. As far as health and safety and violence in the classroom, the previous government had committed to an education sector specific portion of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. That's going to be one concrete step. I would love to see that happen. This is not throwing money anywhere. What that does, it is empowers workers to speak up about the violence that's happening in the classroom. You know what I heard about this fall more often than I could have ever imagined? Pencil stabbings. Why is that happening in our schools? Who is making sure that the students have the supports long before it gets to that escalated time? An Occupational Health and Safety Act portion of the education-specific part would actually empower workers, because right now we're kind of in an industrial field where people don't want to report because nothing happens when they do.
I've never heard of that. You tell me a little bit more about. It's not an issue that we've seen in Waterloo Region. Where is it happening?
Pencil stabbings?
Yeah.
Oh, well,
Not to derail it, but I'm interested.
One of the things I do in my job, and the other members of my executive do, is we go to local meetings. And I heard it once, and then I heard it another time, and other members of my executive. I can give you specifics. Was it
particular areas, or was it all across?
No, that's the problem. It was in a number of different areas.
And is it student on student violence?
Student, and sadly, a lot of student on staff.
Interesting.
As well. These are students who are escalated, who are being really challenged to communicate, who maybe don't have the tools that they need, and so they're acting out and picking the closest thing that they have to express their frustration. I think we should be dealing with the frustration long before it gets to that point.
Would you say the incidents that are primarily happening, especially around that, are more in the sort of the special education classrooms, or is it
No.
it's across the board?
Yeah.
Renee, do you want to? I see your head nodding there. So
That's the interesting question, and I tried to touch on it earlier. It's beyond that now, and I think part of that is we always think of violence in the wrong context for kids. It's a form of communication. And we're seeing more of it because more kids have lost their confidence they can learn. They have a sense that I'm missing something because they missed stuff in COVID and we haven't caught them up. And they need more time. And they're in a classroom going, I'm not capable of doing this. When they are, they just don't understand how to get past that. And that leads to frustration. And when you have more and more people with those frustrations, we're getting all of these unusual behaviors. And I'm hearing the same kinds of things Karen is talking about. Part of that challenge is, too, at the same time, we've compounded because I have less time in a class with kids. The class sizes are up, and they need one-on-one time, and at a time they need it most, I don't have it. We have less child and youth workers. We have less social workers who help to bridge those kids who are having the most trouble, get identified. We're great at identifying kids. We're just not really good at supporting them because we don't have the things in place. And so we have lots of room to work, to your point earlier. I think another example is the safety reporting. And we used to have regular meetings of a safety table, but it's kind of dead in the water. We should be having regular communications, and I spoke a lot to that. A partnership where we collaborate and speak with each other would inform our policy.
Would that
so
table
much more.
come from the board level, or would that be ministry policy?
We had a ministry one, and the ones at the boards need to be more functional too, let me be clear. So at every level, conversation about safety, I agree with you 100%. Conversation is one of our best, most underutilized tools right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank
you. I would start off by asking you the metric of every dollar invested in education equals so much economic return, but it seems as though the government is immune to these, simple fiscal arguments, logical arguments, or even humane arguments. But also, this morning, we had an opportunity to talk to the Minister of Finance, and it seems pretty basic that to properly address a problem, you have to name a problem in order to work to solve it. School violence appears nowhere in Budget 2024, and student mental health appears nowhere in Budget 2024. Would you care to comment about these?
Yeah, I'm hoping that the mention of security cameras is not the method for dealing with violence, because just like if I get a photo radar ticket, which I don't get, it doesn't do anything to stop me from speeding. I could still have an accident from speeding. It does nothing. Afterwards, I get the punishment, but it doesn't do anything for me. The supports need to be in place beforehand. Again, people, a lot of people working in education are doing their absolute best. And when an incident happens, they don't talk about it. They don't talk to their colleagues about it. They don't want to report it, and they report it even less when in the past, if the administrator, and I'm not blaming the principals, they have a lot on their plate, they say, well, the student didn't mean it. Okay. A colleague of mine, who's now a local president, and she stood up because of the incident, was just about punched to death by a student. She was off work for 2 years. She missed 2 years of her young son's life. There's a story about her on the front page of the Globe and Mail about what had happened. Those incidents are not rare. Those incidents are happening far too often. People who have, even wearing Kevlar. I had to wear Kevlar when I was a regular classroom teacher. You can still pinch pretty hard through Kevlar. I need to make sure that I have the supports in place and that I have the social workers and, whether it's kids who need extra supports in whatever form, that they're diagnosed and they have the support they need, and not just if the parents are able to pay for that private testing, but to have it happen in the schools. And, it just has such a long-term impact, and the other students see it. And that's my concern. You talk about your 5 kids. I'm sure, they're very well behaved and they're studying very hard, but what they're seeing in the classroom, definitely has an impact. And the kids don't even talk about it. They don't go home and tell their parents. We keep it all really quiet, hoping it'll get better. We don't accept that in the medical profession. There's signs saying we won't tolerate any type of abuse, yet in schools, it's part of your job. It's not part of your job.
You know, and I want to thank you also for recognizing the human impact, how that impacts people's private lives, as well as how this school violence impacts an entire community for years to come. Renee, I'd like to turn over to you. And similarly, well, to begin, actually, I just want to say it was quite a revelation when hearing you speak, watching how fidgety and squirmy government members got caught when you were discussing all of your material. But I wanted to ask, what possible reason would, and see they're squawking now, what possible reason would the government have for omitting school violence and student mental health from Budget 2024?
I mean, I can't speak to what people are thinking. What I would note is that we have been raising that at the highest levels for several years. The fact that it doesn't show up demonstrates that we haven't been heard, which is what I was speaking to. We need teachers and workers in schools need to be respected. We all know the managers who don't listen to their workers, and we know the ones who cut back and they remove staff, and then they tell you to do more work, and then they wonder why the business is going downhill. Right? It's every worker understands that. So I can't speak to what people are thinking. All I know is that it's not in there after we have done everything possible. After it's been in the media, it still didn't make it in there. So you're asking a really good question.
You know, and it's something that we as the official opposition have brought up numerous times. The teacher local, Thames Valley Teacher Local, has actually tracked the number of violent incidents per month, and it's been brought to the government's attention numerous times, and yet we still see that very glaring omission from Budget 2024. I did want to...
Sorry,
Of course.
There was a safety blitz that was initiated by the government last year, and that was really important data to collect, but maybe you could ask for that data because we haven't seen what the data is. We know what our members reported when the inspectors came to the schools, but we don't know overall what the data was. So I think it would be really helpful if you saw that data. It would really point out what's going on in the schools.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. We will certainly follow up. Renee, I just wanted to ask the exact same question I asked to the Minister of Finance today. How will hallway security cameras stop the violence that is happening in classrooms?
Security cameras won't stop the violence that's happening in cameras, and they're money that would be much better spent on people who could spend time with the kids who are most in need because they're calling out for help and attention, and they need that more than a camera.
Karen, I'd like to ask you the same direct question. How will hallway security cameras stop the violence that is happening in classrooms?
They're not. It's going to be something for someone to review afterwards. I'm still attached to a school, and I get emails that say, can someone identify this student, please? We're doing that. It's not changing anything. It hasn't made a difference. I think we need some concrete action addressing the needs of those students as opposed to recording them.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much for that. We'll now go to MPP Hazel.
And then, Rennie, I'm with you still. And my follow-up question is, I know you have recommendations for this government. I want you to take my minutes and just state your top three, not a lot, just top three recommendations / priorities that you would like to put on record.
Go ahead, yep.
Okay. I've gone first every time, but I'm okay with that. There is, through the Ontario Teachers Federation, a supply and demand action table, and it's to look at the recruitment and retention issue in the province. We've met. There hasn't been a lot of concrete action that's come out of that, and that's something I would really like to see addressed. Like I said, I'm still attached to a school, and 3 weeks ago I got an email on a Sunday night that said, we have 6 teachers who will be away. We're unable to fill those positions, so here are the emergency on-calls. If you are sick, please call in as soon as possible so we can try and have that coverage. The next week, same thing, 4 people. We have, you have to, according to the Education Act, have an adult in front of the students. They only need to have a high school diploma and a police record check. The students in Ontario deserve better than that, and I think that's really a concern going forward. So that's one recommendation we would like, is to see some action on that supply and action retention table.
Okay. Thank you.
I would echo the recruitment and retention crisis cannot be left. It's the same in nursing and a number of the other areas there. Lower class sizes and staffing. We need more time with the children who need us most. And mental health services, which I would pair with, which came up here, safety, data, and dialogue. And to the question that came up earlier about getting that data, let me be clear that the reporting of safety in schools is dysfunctional. And it is only partial. We need to improve the data collection, because even the data we're collecting right now is way underrepresented of what's actually going on. And we can get into all the reasons, but that would take a far longer conversation.
And if I could add a third
Yep,
one.
yes.
I totally, and as an organization, we totally support the move to de-streaming. So that's where you don't have multi-levels of students in grade 9 and grade 10, where every student has the opportunity to continue on whichever pathway. But the problem is those students have come together in very large classes. So students who would have had more support, more adult contact in a class of 15 or 20 in the past are now in a class of 36. And while there's been some training and professional development, that it hasn't been addressed on a level that would allow that support for those students. So I think we need to be looking at those supports so the students of Ontario are successful going forward, so that they have the contacts that they need, so that they have those supports. And we're doing a disservice to the students if we're making an announcement and then not doing anything to go along with it.
And my last question, so you're here now, are you feeling better with your presentation? Are you even feeling better?
I'm feeling like my members who are probably watching will say, thank you for speaking up, but we need to do more than cross our fingers and hope that the government will do the right thing, not just do the right thing when they've been caught doing something they shouldn't have been doing. Sorry.
1 minute.
Naive, and when people show you who they are, I've been told believe them. And so I would hope that we could see some changes, because if this current budget is the most recent message, it builds on a pattern that causes me great concern.
Well, thank you for putting all your concerns on the record.
Okay. Thank you. MPP Cole.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, thank you to all the three presenters overall. Mr. Church, my question is going to be directed to you, but I have a preamble to begin. I represent an area in the region of Durham, and it has 8 municipalities, and we have 3 boards of education: Public Board, the Catholic Board, and the Francophonie Board going forward. I meet regularly with board officials. Recently, just about a week ago, I met with the chair of the public board directors, and also I meet with the directors of education, the Catholic board and the Francophone board. I also meet with parents, and I think you would expect that go to all three, go to schools in all 3 boards. Uppermost in the minds of parents, and in the town of Whitby that I represent, I've had close to 30,000 people come in since 2018. Uppermost in their minds, and I'm just looking at my notes so I represent this accurately, is to build more schools and child care spaces. You both will know from your reading of the budget that we are investing $23 billion, including approximately $16 billion in capital grants over the next 10 years to build more schools and child care spaces, directly responding to those thousands that I have the privilege of representing who have told me, and they've told me regularly. And I've reached out to them. And Mr. Church, this is to your point about regular communications. I think it's important for us as representatives of communities to have regular communications with parents, to have regular communications with administrators, have regular communications of all 3 boards, right? Like I just described earlier. Mr. Church, do you support those investments that I just described? And if you do, I'd be pleased to hear that. If you don't, then I'd like to hear from you why you don't.
So let me start by saying I appreciate the point you're making and the value you place on conversations. I would note that in saying you're meeting with directors and parents and stuff, it's absent the voice of teachers, which remains a concern for me. Would we welcome building more schools? Absolutely. We work in the schools that are being run down. We know more than anybody how many of them need help. The question is not how much you're spending. The question is how much do we need to spend? If, like I used the example earlier, if I'm working in a classroom where I got 17 broken desks and you offer to fix one, I'll be happy to get the desk fixed. But I won't be able to do my job properly unless you fix all 17. So even though it's a large amount of money, the question isn't how much we're spending. The question is what's the condition of the schools. From our perspective in the classroom, that's how we see it, and that we'd love to have more conversations so you would understand that perspective from the classrooms. But we welcome any investment, always.
All right, so you do invest that 23, you do support the $23 billion that is in the Ontario budget.
I'd be shocked to find anyone who wouldn't support making our schools better.
All right, thank you. Then Mr. McGregor.
Oh, thanks. Time check, Chair?
3.5.
Awesome. Well, thank you to all our guests for being here today. And I do want to note the government currently has deals, and I believe they've been ratified with our two unions that are here today by the members. And I don't know if we always say this enough, but thank you for that, and thank you for the work that you undertook. To that, I want to talk about mental health a little bit. And this is something that certainly has been a growing issue, certainly in this iteration of government, but I think in society in general, like across the country, across the province, across the world probably. And you know, when the PC government took office, I was elected in 2022, but when these guys came in 2018, the total mental health budget for schools in Ontario was, I think, $18 million, kind of in the late teens. Now it's over $100 million. And I appreciate the ask for more because the problem's growing, and I do want to put on the record, I've done this a few times. You know, I access cognitive behavioral therapy myself. I think everybody should. There's a few of us that are out that are receive mental health support. There are many more MPPs that aren't out about it, but you know, I feel comfortable being upfront about it. So it's important to do that. We know that we need to do more for the mental health of our kids. A lot of the problems that you've outlined, I think, are very conducive to that, or you know, because of some of the mental health issues that we just didn't see in previous generations. Talking about that investment that we've made, and I appreciate you want it to be higher. Maybe start with Karen. How much higher? Like, what would a good dollar figure be? And then, do you also have some success stories of different programs and different school boards, ways that money is spent that you think would be intelligent for the government to pursue?
So maybe the chair is going to give us an additional hour because I always have lots of ideas. That would be great.
Happy to talk.
Thank you, though, for being, you know, honest and open and sharing, and I really appreciate that. And I think we have to do that more in order so that we can erase the stigma of mental health and address the needs. More is good, but what the problem is right now is we don't have the people to fill the jobs, and the number of jobs that are going unfilled. And what's happening is many of we call them our PSSP, our professional support personnel, psychologists, mental health workers, child and youth workers, are leaving the system. You know, I hear it all the time. Well, you teachers, you make lots of money, you have the summers off, you have weekends off. People are taking all of the school issues home with them. But what's happening more, it's like the person that I mentioned who's a child and youth worker and is now split between two schools. That's really a challenge for them. Why can't we have a full person in each of those schools? The population hasn't changed, the numbers haven't changed.
I appreciate, again, we've heard some of the rhetoric around we understand that you want more investment for your members. Totally get that. What I'm wondering is, like, investments that have gone well that should be modeled and duplicated, could you point out to it was $114 million last year. Point to some success metrics that stipulate a further investment in mental health care supports.
Yeah. I want to say it's not rhetoric. This is truth, that there are jobs that aren't being filled, that are going absent for extended periods of time. Many of our child and youth workers, they have programs in the schools. I'm not at that micro level. I'm at the larger level, but I do hear from our members saying... Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Not only for that question, but for this panel, and we want to thank the panel very much for the time you took to prepare and the time you took to come here today to present to us and help us in our deliberations.